Henrietta, our daughter-in-law, loudly said that elderly folks like us, being of a different class, shouldn't come to the housewarming party. We were shocked by her audacity and couldn't find words to respond. I had kept silent for our eldest son Warren's sake. But Henrietta's disrespectful attitude reached my limit. My husband Reagan and I exchanged glances, nodded in agreement, and told Henrietta that we understood. Satisfied, she smiled and went back to Warren. I am Bridget, 73 years old, and Warren is our son with Reagan. Warren was always quiet but started to assert himself in college. He introduced us to the woman he was seriously dating, and we happily consented to their marriage. Around 3 years into their marriage, during Christmas, Warren and his wife were coming home for the first time. I was excited to spend time with Henrietta. When they arrived, Henrietta initially seemed shy but gradually relaxed. As it got dark, I stood up to prepare dinner, and Henrietta offered to help in the kitchen. While we were in the kitchen, an unfamiliar voice, lower and harsher than usual, said, "It's cold. This house is too cold." I turned towards Henrietta in disbelief, and she was rubbing her hands together with discontent. In an unhappy tone, she expressed her dislike for old houses and complained about Warren insisting they come. Stunned, I was speechless as Henrietta vented her bad mood at me. She even made a disparaging comment, suggesting my appearance was all an act to get married. "I'm tired of waiting. Hurry up and get ready." "I'm hungry," said Henrietta, seemingly annoyed by my stunned silence. She gestured towards the stove and spoke dismissively. I hurried to obey, probably more shaken than I realized. Once I started moving, Henrietta did nothing but dictate, not lifting a finger to help. She complained about everything, criticized my methods, yet did nothing herself. By the time the preparations were done, and it was just a matter of serving the food, Henrietta suddenly became active, charming Reagan and Warren, and blushing at their praise. It was then I finally understood this was Henrietta's true nature. 10 years later, Warren and his wife were returning for a visit. Henrietta had shown her true colors many times, but only in my presence. She never behaved that way in front of Reagan or Warren. I had kept silent, thinking it might be a misunderstanding, but the same things happened every time they visited, confirming my suspicions. Hearing they were coming back, I felt a bit downhearted. While planning to avoid being alone with Henrietta as much as possible, the doorbell rang. Sighing, I opened the door to find Warren standing alone. Surprised not to see Henrietta, I involuntarily looked around for her. Warren, noticing my reaction, spoke with a hint of apology. "Sorry, Mom. Henrietta had some urgent work and will join us later. She said it's okay to go ahead with the grave visit without her." It seemed Henrietta wouldn't be joining until her work was finished, and I felt a sense of relief at the thought of not having to witness Henrietta's behavior, even for a little while. I welcomed Warren into the house, and Reagan, who was in the living room, noticed Henrietta's absence and asked about her. While preparing tea, I found myself sighing deeply without realizing it. We decided to relax for the day and postponed the grave visit to the next day. When Warren informed Henrietta, she responded, "Understood, but I still can't finish my work and come over, so please apologize to the others for me." Reagan laughed it off as unavoidable, but I couldn't help feeling that Henrietta just didn't want to attend the grave visit. However, I couldn't voice such thoughts, so I just said not to worry about it, and we spent the day uneventfully. The next day, after finishing visiting the grave and relaxing at home, Henrietta called, saying, "Finally finished with work, so I'll be heading over tonight." The timing of her call right after the grave visit seemed a bit off to Reagan and Warren too, hastening my suspicion. That evening, just as we were about to have dinner, Henrietta arrived. She appeared a bit sweaty and out of breath, as if she had rushed. I frowned involuntarily, but Reagan and Warren were so pleased to see her that I decided not to say anything. Henrietta, having been freed from work, was told to take a shower first while dinner was being prepared. She replied somewhat apologetically. When she emerged for the bathroom at dinner time, she muttered upon seeing the food on the tray, "Sandwiches, that's it? After a hot day at the grave, I'm tired of eating this." I managed to avoid going to someone else's grave in this heat, and all I get is a simple meal. Henrietta tied up her hair and walked towards the living room. I felt angry but couldn't find the words to confront her. In the living room, she instantly started chatting happily with Regan, leaving me silently frustrated. Another 10 years passed, and Warren decided to move from his apartment to a house. After discussing it with Henrietta, they decided to pay as much down payment as possible themselves, but asked us for a little help with the shortfall. We couldn't refuse our dear Warren's request, so we immediately agreed and transferred the needed amount. Soon after, Warren informed us that their new house was built, and they planned the housewarming party with both families. I hadn't seen Henrietta's parents since the wedding, so I eagerly agreed to attend, considering everything that had happened. Warren was delighted with my response and immediately shared the news with Henrietta, who I imagined was on the other end of the phone. Thus, we were set to attend the housewarming party next month. A few days after this was decided, Henrietta unexpectedly visited alone. I was surprised by her unannounced visit and opened the door without realizing it was her. Looking up, I saw Henrietta with an unhappy expression, and I was taken aback. "I'll come in." Henrietta quickly checked for keys in the entrance and pushed past me to enter the house. Her arrogant behavior continued as she walked into the living room, probably because she noticed that Regan's keys weren't in the entrance. Indeed, Regan was out for his daily walk and wouldn't be back for a while. Taking advantage of this, Henrietta had barged into our home. Feeling trapped, I followed her into the living room, where she waited for me without sitting down. Before I could even close the door, Henrietta glared at me and said, "Bridget, you're planning to come to the housewarming party. It's a nuisance, so can you please not come?" Surprised, I responded, "What are you suddenly talking about?" Regan wasn't there, so Henrietta, crossing her arms, started speaking in a high-handed manner. "You're planning to tattle to my parents about me, aren't you?" Henrietta glared at me with evident disgust, clearly not wanting her parents to know about her behavior. She must have specifically chosen a time when Warren was working, and she had a day off, knowing about Regan's routine walk, and had timed her visit accordingly. Henrietta was cunning indeed. Calmly, I replied, "I had no such intention, but now that you mention it, it might not be a bad idea." Henrietta frowned in annoyance, saying, "It's no joke. I married Warren because he's good-looking and earns decently. I don't want to deal with annoying relatives revealing." Henrietta's expression froze when she realized I had caught on to the true reason for marrying Warren. As I worried about her strange behavior, the living room door opened behind me. Turning around, I saw Regan, who looked surprised as he gazed at Henrietta, realizing that her conversation with me had been overheard. Henrietta clicked her tongue but decided to brazen it out, telling us the real reason. "Elderly folks like you, being of a different class, shouldn't come to the housewarming party." We were astounded by her audacity, at a loss for words. I reached my limit with Henrietta, daring to say such things even in Warren's absence. I had kept silent for Warren's sake until now, but I could no longer overlook such behavior. My husband Regan seemed to share my sentiment. At her utterly disrespectful attitude, we exchanged glances, nodded in agreement, and said to Henrietta, "Understood." Satisfied, she smiled and went back to Warren. Left behind, we felt suddenly very tired and sat down on the sofa. On the day of the housewarming party, we didn't go to Warren and his wife's home. We hadn't told Warren anything about the incident with Henrietta. Naturally, he must have thought we were coming. By now, Warren and his wife might be panicking, sipping coffee with Regan at a cafe. I pondered this. Then Regan's mobile phone rang. He got up, answered the call, and stepped out of the cafe. I quickly paid the bill and followed him out, getting into the car. Regan switched the phone to speaker mode so I could hear Warren's voice too. "Dad, something strange is happening. All my relatives have suddenly got other plans, and you and Mom haven't arrived yet. Even Henrietta's relatives are canceling one after another. What's going on?" Feeling guilty about Warren's anxious tone but deciding to play dumb, we exchanged glances. "Who knows what Henrietta's saying?" Reagan asked, sounding casual. His acting was so natural that it surprised me. Noticing my reaction, Regan winked and gestured to keep it a secret. I had to stifle a laugh, covering my mouth. Henrietta is also confused. "Oh, another call's coming in. I'll call back later. Be safe, coming over." Warren still seemed to expect our visit, making me feel remorseful. But I convinced myself it was necessary to get back at Henrietta. Then my mobile phone rang. It was a relative who was supposed to attend today's party. Feeling sorry but chatting for a bit, I was engaged in a long conversation with a talkative relative when Regan's phone rang again. It was Warren. Regan switched to speaker mode and answered, "Dad, I just spoke to Henrietta's mom." "What's going on? If you can still come, please do right away." Warren's voice, sounding close to tears, made me feel a tightness in my chest. Regan looked at me with furrowed brows. After I nodded at Regan, he reassured Warren. "Understood. We'll be right there. Calm down." With that, Warren, sounding relieved, hung up. We who were at a cafe near Warren's new home drove towards his place. Upon arriving and ringing the doorbell, Warren rushed out to greet us. Behind him, Henrietta glared at us with furious eyes. Once inside, Warren ushered us to the living room, waiting for us to sit on the sofa. Eagerly, he asked, "I didn't expect you to arrive so soon. Where were you? What's going on?" All our relatives are angry. Henrietta's relatives are apologizing, and I have no idea what's happening. Calm down, Warren. First of all, congratulations on your new home. I'll explain everything now, I said to calm him down. I turned to Henrietta, who was silently sitting. "You know why we're the only ones here, don't you, Henrietta?" "What do you mean?" Henrietta feigned ignorance, prompting me to sigh lightly before starting. "It seems you don't want us here, but given the current situation, your worries are gone, aren't they?" "Didn't want us here. What does that mean?" Warren sounded confused. I smiled slightly and continued. "Both your relatives and ours know everything now. Unfortunately, your plans have failed. You've already been reprimanded by your relatives, haven't you?" A low growl unmistakably from Henrietta was heard. Ignoring this, I continued, looking straight at Henrietta. "Given Warren's reaction now, you've been pretending to be good ever since you were dating him. Now that your true nature is exposed, why don't you just accept it?" "I didn't invite you." Her voice, now much quieter than before, made Warren lean in closer to hear her. She repeated, "I didn't invite you. I told you not to come. Why did you come anyway and spread lies among the relatives, framing me? Is that fun for you?" Taken aback by her intensity, Warren recoiled. I sighed at Henrietta, still insisting she was the victim. "Mobile phones are so handy, aren't they, Henrietta?" I nodded at Reagan. He took out his phone, operated it, and then looked at Warren. "I just wanted to marry Warren because he's good-looking and earns decently. I don't want to deal with troublesome relatives. Anyway, elderly folks like you, being of a different class, shouldn't come to the housewarming party." Henrietta's words from that day played from Regan's mobile phone. Henrietta turned pale and looked at Warren. After the playback, Warren turned slowly to Henrietta, his mouth agape. Henrietta tried to deny it, but what excuse could she give after that recording? The weather turned bad, so I cut my walk short and came back only to hear this incredible conversation. I couldn't help but record it. "Glad it was useful," Regan said regretfully. Warren looked at me for confirmation, and I nodded firmly. "I couldn't believe it at first either, Warren, but the truth is there in the recording." Henrietta's true feelings and her last words were said despite my presence. It's hard to escape now. Regan fixed his gaze on Henrietta, questioning how anyone could stay calm knowing she had been deceiving everyone since her dating days with Warren, let alone after their marriage. Seeing his look, Henrietta dropped her shoulders and ceased her struggle. This seemed like an affirmation to Warren, who abruptly stood up and left the house. It happened so suddenly that we couldn't stop him, and although Regan hurried after him, he soon returned. Apparently, Warren had driven off somewhere, leaving his mobile phone behind, making it impossible for us to call him. Henrietta, left behind and surrounded by us, sat trembling and pale, huddled up. As time passed helplessly, Warren eventually returned, holding something in his hand, which he slammed in front of Henrietta, saying quietly, "Sign the divorce papers and leave." Henrietta looked up at Warren, her mouth agape, but Warren repeated himself, took a pen from the holder on the table, and began to fill in his part. After finishing, he forced the pen into Henrietta's hand and tapped on the divorce papers. "Come on, sign, and leave." Overwhelmed, Henrietta, though frightened, filled in her part. She looked at Warren when finished, but he, without making eye contact, was checking for any missing details. Finding no errors, he forcefully made Henrietta stand up and dragged her to the front door. He then pushed Henrietta out of the house, ignoring her attempts to cling to him and throwing her bag outside. "It's late, so I'll submit this tomorrow. Don't ever come back to this property," he said, slamming the door shut and locking it. Henrietta's pleading voice could be heard from outside, but Warren ignored it and turned to apologize to us. "I'm sorry for the trouble. I had no idea she was like that." We could say nothing to his deep apology, just embracing him. Before long, Henrietta's voice faded away. We decided to stay at Warren's new home that night. The next morning, Warren submitted the divorce paper first thing, and his divorce from Henrietta was finalized. Concerned about his heartache, we chose to stay another night. And that evening, with a somewhat calmer Warren, we discussed everything that had happened. As we recounted the past events, Warren listened with clenched fists. Regan, who was also unaware of these details, placed his hand on my shoulder as I spoke. Then we revealed the truth about the current situation. After Henrietta had left, telling us not to come, I learned that Regan had spontaneously recorded the conversation. We decided together to inform Henrietta's parents. When we called and explained the situation, Henrietta's parents, initially in disbelief, changed their attitude and kept apologizing. After hearing the recorded audio, angry about their daughter's misdeeds, they intended to tell the relatives who had planned to attend the housewarming party not to go. After hanging up, we discussed and decided to do the same with our relatives. They too were furious and said they wouldn't attend. That is how the current situation unfolded. Hearing all this, Warren's shoulders drooped again, worried but unable to do anything. We decided to spend another night. The next day, Warren came into the living room, looking relieved, and shared what happened the previous night. He had apparently contacted his former in-laws. Henrietta was now at her parents' home, being disowned and facing eviction. They also planned to bring alimony, which would be imposed on Henrietta as her debt. While Warren felt this was not enough, he seemed more settled than expected. After returning home, we immediately started packing up our old house. Now dated, it was set to be handed over. The house was actually being remodeled for us to live in together. Since Warren was at work during the day, the renovations were to take place. Though costly to modify a newly built home, with some financial gain from the recent events and our help, the decision was made. While waiting for the house's remodeling, we were happily clearing out our old home. I checked my phone and noticed I had 13 missed calls, all from my mother-in-law, Martha. Not again. While thinking about this, my phone vibrated once more. I answered, "Hello." Martha sounded angry. "Excuse me. Wasn't the allowance for this month supposed to be $3,000? It's overdue? Excuse me. I told you to send the allowance. This month's payment hasn't been deposited yet." Martha ranted, ignoring my situation and only thinking about what she wanted. I was fed up with her. Even in this situation, she doesn't think about what she says and does, right? I have no choice but to go for my last option. I gathered my thoughts and told my phone, "Your son has passed away, so I can't send an allowance anymore. I'm Jennifer Smith, 32 years old, a busy woman working at a major financial firm and a housewife. I got married about 2 years ago to my beloved husband, Mark, whom I met through our shared hobbies. His kind nature and warm smile drew me in, and we quickly developed feelings for each other. After a year of dating, we got engaged. both convinced that we were the best for each other. We lived together without major quarrels and decided to marry. Everything was smooth until a problem arose. Martha, my mother-in-law. My father-in-law passed away a few years ago, leaving Martha as Mark's only family. The trouble began when I first visited her before our wedding. "Nice to meet you." Martha clearly showed displeasure. "So, you're Mark's fiancé?" "Yes, I'm Jennifer Miller." "You're a rather plain girl. I wonder what Mark sees in you, huh?" I couldn't tell if she was joking or serious. Having such words from my loved one's mother shocked me. Observing my distress, Mark scowled at Martha. "Hey, Mom, what's with the sudden harsh words? How can you say such things about the person I chose?" "No, Mark, I'm just trying to pick a suitable woman for you." "Pick? I'm the one who chose her. You have no right to interfere. Don't say it in such a cold way. I'm just telling the truth because I care about you. If you were really thinking of me, you'd simply support us. Why can't you understand such a simple thing?" An argument unfolded between mother and son right before my eyes, making the air heavy. As it was my first meeting with Martha, I wasn't in a position to intervene. Despite the lingering awkwardness, we eventually conveyed our intent to marry. As we were leaving, Martha called out to Mark, sounding somewhat disgruntled. "Mark, can I have a word? You're going to keep that promise after you get married, right?" "What promise?" "You know about the allowance." "Ah, that. Yes, I'll be sure to take care of that. Can we not discuss it here, please?" "Well, I was just asking." The tension between my husband and his mother persisted, and discomfort hung thick in the air. In the car on the way home, I questioned Mark about the conversation he had with his mom as we were leaving. "Hey, Mark, about the talk you had with your mom." "Yeah, I should have told you about it, Jennifer. I heard something about an allowance. After my dad passed away, I've been sending money to my mom every month." "How much?" $2,000. "What? $2,000? I couldn't help but raise my voice in surprise. He sighed deeply and began to explain slowly. "Actually, my mom has a debt. She lost a lot of money at a casino a long time ago, and she's still paying it off. Her health isn't great these days, so she spends a lot of time at home. But she still needs money to live, right? But $2,000, isn't that a bit too much? If I try to lower the amount, she keeps calling me over and over. And no matter what, a mother is still a mother. I worry about her living alone." "I see. Mark is really devoted to his mother, but that makes sense. Since his father passed away, Martha has been the only family he has left. Regardless of her character, she's still his beloved mother. At that time, I only saw my husband as a kind person. 2 months after our wedding, during my lunch break one day, I got a call on my smartphone. The call was from Martha. When I answered with a hello, Martha began to speak cheerfully. "Jennifer, long time no see. Can we chat for a bit?" "Yes, what can I do for you?" "Well, I was hoping you could start sending me money." "Excuse me?" I was so taken aback, I couldn't find words to respond. However, Martha seemed excited to continue the conversation. "You mentioned before that you're working for a financial company, right? That means you have a good salary, doesn't it?" "Well, not exactly." "What, you're lying to avoid giving me money?" "That's not what I mean." "Then what is it?" "But Martha, you're still receiving financial support from Mark, aren't you?" To my question, Martha responded defiantly. "So what?" Jennifer sternly expressed her feelings. "Martha, getting $2,000 monthly support is a big deal. And yet you're asking for more. Really? You think so? If you were to send me an additional $1,000, I could avoid burdening Mark." "What do you mean by that?" "Well, I have Mark as a guarantor for my debts. If I fail to make payments, the debt collectors will go after him. Do you understand?" "But aren't you using part of Mark's $2,000 to pay back the debt?" "I'm short. I haven't told Mark, but I have a significant amount of debt." Martha's tone made it clear that this was a fact. Even her husband was unaware of it. With future plans of having children, our expenses were set to increase. On top of that, taking over Martha's debt wasn't an easy task. But if Martha's payments fell behind and the debt landed on Mark, the interest would likely accumulate significantly by then. If I refused to send money, it would eventually become a problem for my husband. It seemed better for Martha to clear her debt now. Reluctantly, I agreed to Martha's proposal. All right, I'll start sending you money. Really? Good God, Jennifer. I knew you would say that. The total, with Mark's contribution, will be $3,000. But this means you can pay off your debt, right? Yes, of course. I should be able to pay it all off in about a year. You promise, right? You'll make sure to pay off all your debts? I get it. So I'll be expecting it from this month onwards. Martha ended the call abruptly. The combination of physical exhaustion from work and this emotional burden only added to my stress. $1,000 a month, that's going to be rough, but it's also to prevent future problems for us. After all, if Martha can't make a living, it will upset Mark as well. That night, I promptly reported the matter to my husband. He told me I didn't have to do this, but I had already given my word to Martha, and it was a decision made for our future well-being. Mark expressed his gratitude and understanding, wearing a sorry expression throughout. Time passed, and 2 years have gone by. The financial support we initially thought would last a year is still ongoing, and even now, we're sending $3,000 every month to Martha. Moreover, about 2 months ago, Mark fell ill and hasn't been able to work. He's on sick leave, receiving disability benefits, but it's much less than his previous salary. Last month, I managed to transfer $3,000 to Martha from my savings. But if this situation continues, it will be very challenging. Shockingly, Martha has not visited her sick son even once. Despite informing her about his hospitalization, she doesn't show up and only contacts me to ask, "You're still sending the money, right?" I was furious and decided to talk to Mark about it. Mark, listen. Isn't it wrong that Martha is only concerned about money despite your condition? We need to seriously consider what to do moving forward. Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. I don't want to put more strain on you, Jennifer. This month, too, she's bombarding me with calls and messages, asking if we've sent the money yet. Can you believe it? How could she focus solely on money when her son is unwell? Mark expressed his frustration at his mother, his face showing signs of weariness. Then, with a sudden idea, Mark exclaimed, "I've got it," and flashed a sly grin. "What is it, Mark?" I inquired. "Well, this is our last option. I've thought of something unconventional." "Yeah, for my mom?" "What?" Mark proposed a plan beyond my imagination. While it might be considered inappropriate, it appeared to be the only way to get Martha to comprehend. A few weeks later, Mark was discharged from the hospital. Since Martha hadn't responded to any of our messages, we didn't inform her about Mark's release. In the past 2 weeks, Martha had persistently demanded the money. While Mark and I were enjoying a cup of tea, a message popped up on my phone. Upon checking, I saw 13 missed calls from Martha again. As expected, my phone vibrated once more. It was another call from Martha. "Hello," I responded, activating the speaker microphone so that Mark could also listen. Martha immediately started shouting, "Listen, where's the $3,000 for this month?" "Excuse me, that's right. The money for this month hasn't been transferred yet." "Do you realize Mark is now?" I began, but Martha cut me off, saying, "I don't care if he's in the hospital or whatever. It's none of my business. You're working at a good place, right? You must have plenty of savings. Hurry up and transfer it here." Martha was yelling angrily. Eventually, she said something unbelievable. "Listen, since you married Mark, if he can't pay, you have to pay me. Understand? If you refuse, I'll make you the guarantor. Got it?" At that moment, something inside me snapped. She was openly expressing her demands without considering our situation at all. I had reached my breaking point with her. I had no choice but to resort to the last option. I firmly declared into my smartphone, "Mark has passed away. I can't send you any more money." At these words, Martha blurted out a baffled "What?" This was the final step that my husband suggested: to lie to Martha about Mark's death and observe her reaction. If she showed any sign of sadness, reflected on her behavior, and apologized, we would continue to support her financially. But if she didn't reflect and demanded money, we would sever ties completely. Deep down, I believed that even someone like Martha would deeply reflect on her actions if she were told that her own son had died. But in the very next moment, Martha burst into loud laughter. "Yay, what's so funny?" I asked. "Well, isn't it obvious? If Mark is dead, that means his inheritance will be distributed to me too." "Excuse me. I've been looking into it since I heard that Mark was sick. Listen here, 2/3 of Mark's assets are yours, but 1/3 is mine." I was at a loss for words. I never thought that when she first heard that her son was sick, she wouldn't look into treatment, but into how the inheritance would be divided. My anger surpassed. I was simply dumbfounded. My husband seemed to feel the same way, and as our eyes met, he slowly nodded. This was the signal to continue with the plan. Once again, I spoke firmly to Martha. "Martha, did you hear what I said? Mark is dead." "I heard it. What about it? Aren't you sad your own son passed away before you? You just make sure to send me some. I won't let you get away with not doing it." With a click, the phone line was cut off, and a dial tone echoed. I glanced at my husband and saw that he was shaking, his face red with anger. "Mark, are you okay?" I asked. As I asked, my husband looked into my eyes and said, "I'm cutting ties with her. She'll likely come here eventually, demanding money. Let's wait until then, okay?" "But are you really okay with this, cutting off ties just like that?" I inquired. "Yeah, I have no regrets. After that call, she's no mother." My husband's eyes were filled with hatred, and I felt the same way. A person who only thinks about money over her own son's life is not family to me. A few days later, as we expected, Martha came to our house. For the time being, I decided to hide my husband in the next room and deal with Martha myself. Then Martha approached me with a face like a demon. "Hey, give me Mark's inheritance right now," she demanded. Again with that. "Anything else to say? He's already dead, isn't he? It's pointless to say anything now. Yet you never even visited him. What are you saying? Are you really his mother? You're so annoying. Give me the inheritance right away. I don't mind getting a lawyer. Speaking more would be a waste of time." Just as I thought that, my husband emerged from the next room. Seeing him, Martha let out a startled gasp, as if she had seen a ghost. "Mark, why weren't you dead?" "Long time no see, Mom. Sorry, but the news about my death was a lie." "Lie? How could you be so disrespectful?" "I wanted to confirm your true nature, Mom. I was curious about how you'd handle the allowance if your son died. But you turned out to be a gold digger, just as I suspected. I got that perfectly." "What? How dare you call your mother a gold digger?" "Silence. I'm cutting ties with a toxic parent like you." Martha's mouth was agape at my husband's angry shouts. She could not come to terms with the fact that her own son was severing ties with her. "What? What does this mean, Mark?" "It means exactly what I said. I can't consider someone like you as my mother. No way." "Then what about the allowance? Do you really think I would? You're on your own with the debts. We're moving." "Wait, please. If you do that, what about my living expenses?" With tears in her eyes, Martha reached out to my husband. He forcefully shook off her hand, looked at her coldly, and said, "I don't care about your living expenses. You have been living off us without even a single apology. I really understand your despicable nature now. Don't you dare show up in front of us again." "No, wait, Mark. Are you going to abandon your mother?" Ignoring her words, my husband seized Martha's arm and guided her to the front door. He tossed her shoes and bag outside and escorted Martha out of the house. Martha created a commotion outside for a while but eventually disappeared, possibly unable to withstand the scrutiny of the neighbors. Despite her multiple attempts to contact us, we ignored all of them. Martha's number was set to be automatically rejected, and we completed our move. Regarding the issue of co-signing for the debts, it became invalid since Martha had made Martha co-signer without his consent, absolving him of responsibility. Without the allowance from us, Martha seems to be leading a challenging life. It's only natural, given that she had been using the allowance for gambling instead of settling her debts. She still faces a substantial debt burden and is pursued by debt collectors daily. Unable to indulge in gambling anymore, she appears to be working tirelessly from dawn to dusk. It's unlikely that she will be able to fully clear her debts in the foreseeable future. She will have to keep working until she is physically unable to do so. This is entirely a consequence of her own actions. As for us, we are enjoying fulfilling days in our new home. My husband's health has stabilized, and he has returned to work. After some time, we discovered a new life growing in my belly. We are expecting an additional member in our family next year. Moving forward, we aim to cherish happy moments as a family of 3.
I'm Christina, 25 years old, and I mostly keep to myself. Even though I have a job or study, my family might think I don't because I don't talk about it much, especially my brother. How did I end up like this? Well, it all goes back to my time in middle school when I started feeling like I couldn't trust people. It's not just one thing that caused it, but mostly because I felt ignored. I guess people didn't find me interesting because I was always into machines. I've always enjoyed messing around with computers, and I was pretty good at it, which helped out at home. But then my school grades dropped because I spent more time with computers than with friends, and my parents got worried. When I finished elementary school, my parents started telling me off, saying, "Stop spending so much time with those machines." During middle school, as my parents kept scolding me, I started feeling like I shouldn't pursue my interests. So whenever I have free time from school, I'd hide in my room to avoid my parents, cutting off contact with the outside world. This made more people think I was strange or risky, and I started feeling isolated even at school. The only person who supported me was my brother Keith. He always knew how to cheer me up and keep me going. With his help, I finished school. But I didn't go to high school. Instead, I did computer jobs from home. When I was about 16, I got a part-time job, and with the money I earned, I bought old computers to take apart and rebuild from scratch, just the way I liked. My hobby became a business opportunity, and by the time I hit 20, I was making and selling computers. Soon, I started my own business, offering affordable computers, and became quite well known. By the time I turned 25, I'd made a decent amount of money. I even started contributing $2,500 to my parents' household each month and still had money left over. Even though I tried explaining my job to my parents, they didn't get it. After a few arguments, they decided that as long as I could support myself, they didn't mind what I did. This meant they stopped interfering and I could live as I pleased at home. But my brother still didn't think much of me. My brother used to be my ally, the one who understood me best when I was in school. He was really kind. But maybe he got tired of his sister, who was still at her parents' house tinkering with machines even after turning 20. Over time, he started treating me harshly whenever he saw me. Since I didn't keep quiet about it, we ended up having more conflicts, and now we're not on good terms. Things got even worse after my brother got married. His wife, who we'd known since high school, never really liked me. After hearing about me from my brother, she didn't want to be my sister-in-law and seemed to influence my brother against me. Because of this ongoing situation, I became known as the troublemaker at home. Even though I stayed in my room most of the time, I felt my heart breaking from all the hostility directed at me, which was different from my parents' concerned words. Suddenly, my parents' home, once a cozy sanctuary despite the criticisms, turned into a hostile environment. I no longer felt comfortable there, and it seemed like my parents were being swayed against me while my allies disappeared. Even though I had my own income and contributed to the household expenses, my brother and sister-in-law, who didn't understand my work, saw me as a burden. They started talking about kicking me out and taking over the house. Feeling disconnected from my brother and his plans, I figured leaving wouldn't make much of a difference. Once I found a new place, I wouldn't have to contribute to household expenses anymore, which meant I could save that money instead. It was kind of a silver lining. As I was thinking about moving out, my brother brought up the topic of inheritance out of the blue. He seemed to think that our parents' financial comfort, despite my lack of a traditional job, was due to their wealth. So when the idea of me leaving came up, he suggested, "Since we'll be taking care of mom and dad, we should inherit their assets. You should give up your share of the inheritance." But the truth was, the reason our parents could enjoy their lives without working was because I was covering their living expenses. I didn't think they could manage without that money, but my brother saw me as nothing but a burden in my room. Despite feeling like leaving was the best option, I decided to ask one more time out of kindness. "Are you really okay with me leaving?" I asked. My brother just laughed and said, "We'd be happy if you left already." It became clear once again how little he understood. I felt sorry for him and his wife, which made me even more determined to leave. A few days later, I was still in my room, and my brother and sister-in-law were relentless in their efforts to get me out. They kept knocking on my door, convinced mom to stop cooking for me, and even told me to do my own laundry. But these were all things I'd have to do if I lived alone anyway. I wasn't going to just sit back and let them take my place away from me without a fight. Sure, I wasn't happy about it, but I wasn't about to accept it either. I was being unfairly pushed out, and I wasn't going to take it lying down. After all, unskilled with machines, something my brother seemed to forget. He didn't realize the power I had with a computer at my disposal. I wasn't the type to quietly obey orders and leave. My brother's marriage, with me as the reclusive sister, was the only chance for our parents to have a grandchild. They were so focused on that, they didn't see how wrong it was for me to leave. So I decided to set up a little surprise for them, a trap that would spring into action as soon as I left the house. After finding a new place to live and completing all the necessary procedures, I was ready to leave my family home. Just before I departed, I left a farewell message for my parents and brother. "I've been supporting the family, and you've forgotten all the good I've done. I hope you realize who the real burden on our family wealth is." My parents seemed surprised for a moment, but they probably trusted that my brother would figure things out somehow. They all brushed off my words as bitterness. I knew they didn't take me seriously. But for now, I believed it was best to leave things this way. So I left the house. I took a significant amount of equipment from my family home and bought additional items, along with necessary furniture and appliances for my new place. I set up my new place just the way I wanted it, decorating it with my favorite style and creating a cozy atmosphere. It turned out to be a perfect environment for me to work in, and surprisingly, living alone wasn't as intimidating as I thought it would be. In fact, I wished I had made the move sooner. The people in the neighborhood were friendly and life was comfortable. Since leaving my family home and taking care of everything on my own, I've been enjoying myself, trying out new experiences. While I was reveling in my newfound independence, I wondered how things were going back at my family home, especially since they lost my financial support. Then, out of the blue, my mother called. "Hey, Christina, did you do something to our machines?" she asked. "What do you mean?" I replied. "There's something wrong with the computers and electronics," she said. "I have no idea about that," I said, puzzled. "I used to help out for free because we're family, but since you treated me poorly and kicked me out, even though you're my parents, you'll have to pay the regular price," I explained. "What? That's pretty greedy. We're your parents. Can't you give us a discount?" They responded. "Well, I prefer giving discounts to my friends. Unlike you, they treat me well," I countered. "Fine, you're so cheap," they grumbled. Internally, I sighed with relief that another trap hadn't been triggered and dealt with the situation calmly. But my mother didn't seem to appreciate my response. She abruptly hung up, behaving like a sulking child, and even sent a spiteful email implying that mean people lose friends. It made me question who was acting like the mature one. Frankly, it seemed self-centered, if not downright selfish. As for what I did to the family computer, I simply restored all the adjustments I had previously made for free back to their original settings. To someone unfamiliar, it might seem like the computer malfunctioned on its own. When I suggested they contact the company for repairs as an individual, they got upset. But I expected as much, so I let it go. 6 months after leaving home and settling into my new life, my father called me. "I hate to ask, but can you lend me some money?" he said. "What do you mean? Lend you money?" I responded. "Your brother and his wife have been spending recklessly. They think we're rich, and they keep complaining, asking for money to buy this or go there," he explained. I have no idea about any of this. Why do you always come to me with everything? I've heard of daughters who live alone sending money home, but parents asking their children for money? Shouldn't it be the other way around, out of generosity? I questioned. It's not that simple, he replied. Well, even $500 would help, he added. I'm not giving you anything. I won't lend you money either. I have no intention of financially supporting you anymore, I firmly stated. Of course, I'll work on your machines if you pay for my services, I replied calmly. You've really become stingy, they retorted. I guess Mom was right about you. They went on complaining about my unemployed years, but I didn't let it bother me. I just ended the call. My father didn't send any emails, but he started calling me multiple times a day, which I found annoying. What troublesome parents I have, I thought to myself. A few days later, my brother, sounding desperate, called me. When I asked why they kept contacting me, he asked, "Do you know why our family was wealthy?" It seemed like he suspected their financial situation had worsened since I moved out. But it was too late. My current home was my sanctuary. My work and life were all centered around this house, and I had no intention of leaving it again. Could it be that our family's wealth came from the $2,500 I was contributing each month? I pondered. I didn't have to give that much, but I felt grateful for my upbringing, so I willingly contributed more. But now, why would I continue supporting a home that kicked me out? It didn't make sense, right? So that's when Mom and Dad's finances took a hit. My brother realized. I'm sorry, but even if you asked me to come back, I have no intention of doing so, I replied firmly. I understand now that what happened was wrong. I'm sorry, but it's too late for apologies. I have no plans to have any involvement with you in the future. Please don't call me anymore. Hey, wait, my brother protested, but I ended the call. When I left home, I made a vow never to be drawn back into their drama. Forgiving them wasn't something I could do easily. I decided to cancel my cell phone contract to avoid the constant calls. 5 years have passed since then, and I've moved on. I got married and started a new chapter in my life. My partner is in the same line of work as me, so he understands my lifestyle and helps out with household chores. Although I thought about reaching out to my parents since they're technically family, I felt it was too late. I hadn't made any attempts to reconnect. However, my husband expressed an interest in meeting my parents and learning about their current situation. To gain insight, I hired a detective to investigate. What we discovered was shocking. My parents, desperate to maintain their lifestyle and keep my brother and his wife tied to the family home, had accrued a mountain of debt from various lenders. With no hope of repayment, the debt continued to grow with accumulating interest, leaving them in a dire situation. The debt from my parents alone exceeded $100,000, and their house had been used as collateral. Now, where our family home once stood, it was only an empty lot. Although I felt a twinge of sadness due to my sentimental attachment to our family home, I couldn't help but think that my parents were facing the consequences of their actions. I decided to look into my brother's current situation. It appeared that my brother had suggested a divorce due to his wife's extravagant spending habits, but she vehemently opposed the idea. They were now embroiled in a drawn-out divorce lawsuit, which was draining both their time and finances. His wife had hired a lawyer and was resisting the divorce, refusing to let go of my brother, leaving them at an impasse. Despite rumors, my brother and his wife hadn't yet had children. To confirm, I sent the detective to the hospital where they were being treated. It turned out my brother was indeed infertile, nearly incapable of producing sperm, making natural conception highly unlikely. My parents, who had pinned their hopes on having grandchildren from my brother and his wife, were disappointed and ended their cohabitation. The family home had to be sold to settle the debt, marking the sad state of my family. This distressing reality became apparent after a cursory investigation. It was evident that engaging with them in this condition wouldn't be beneficial for me or my husband. Now, I have a loving husband, 4 children, and a dog. We've purchased a spacious home and are living the life my family once dreamed of. If they were aware of our situation, they might try to exploit it, which I couldn't bear. As soon as I learned about this, I went to the local office and arranged for my personal information to be accessible only through formal disclosure requests. I made a conscious effort to keep my distance from them and asked my husband not to engage with them regarding our marriage. Although he seemed disappointed at first, after explaining the situation, he understood and hasn't brought it up since. I hope that once things settle down at my family home and a time for reconciliation arrives, I can rebuild a relationship with my parents and brother.